Don't scroll, this story will leave you breathless. Stay with me to the end, because the man who humiliated me on our honeymoon never imagined I'd become his boss. I only married you for the bet. That's what Julian Hawthorne whispered as he tossed divorce papers onto the pristine bed of our overwater villa in Santorini. His voice didn't waver. Mine did. I remember the exact weight of the robe I was wearing. Ivory silk, monogrammed with our initials, L+J, 7 days into our marriage, and that little embroidered promise burned through my chest like a cruel joke. Julian didn't even flinch as he walked away, luggage in hand, laughing to himself like he'd just won a poker game. Because in his mind, he had. Julian was one of the youngest partners at Larch and Everhart, one of the most prestigious investment firms in the country. Charismatic, cutthroat, and devastatingly attractive, he had a reputation that preceded him. I should have known better. I was just a senior analyst then, recently promoted after a string of high-performing campaigns. A nerd in a designer blazer, freshly minted in corporate finance and eager to prove myself in a world dominated by glass ceilings and glass egos. I first met Julian during a late-night budget review. He appeared at my cubicle like a storm in a tailored suit. They say you've got the sharpest spreadsheets in the building, he smirked. Let's see if your numbers can keep up with mine. It wasn't subtle. Nothing about him was. But at the time, I was flattered. When a man like Julian pays attention to a woman like me, quiet, driven, underestimated, it feels like stepping out of the shadows and into the spotlight. I told myself it was real. That the way he brushed my shoulder at meetings meant something. That his invitations to weekend conferences were more than networking tactics. 6 months after our first meeting, he proposed. On the top floor of the firm's headquarters, in front of half the senior partners. My breath caught in my throat, not just from the surprise, but from the look in his eyes. That calculating glint I now know too well. I said yes, of course. Who wouldn't? The wedding was a spectacle. Gold-rimmed place cards. A live string quartet. Imported lilies. He insisted on managing every detail. You only get married once, he'd joke, which I now realize was his version of irony. Everyone in the room thought I was the lucky one. But now, standing in this luxury villa surrounded by ocean and silence, I understood the truth. I had been the punchline to a sick game. You were just part of a bet, Amelia, he said, not even looking at me. 10 grand says I couldn't get the firm's newest rising star to marry me within a year. I won. That's all this was. I stared at him, heart in pieces. Why tell me now? Because this is the best part, he shrugged. The reveal. You get the honeymoon, the heartbreak, and I get the payout. Win-win. The rage didn't come immediately. At first, there was only numbness. Then, like a faucet cracking open, the grief rushed in. My entire identity felt shattered, everything I'd worked for, everything I thought I was, reduced to a bullet point in some alpha male's bar story. But then I remembered something. A key. It had been gifted to me by the firm's founder, Margaret Everhart, on my wedding day. She had pulled me aside, handed me a velvet box, and said, if you ever need to start over, use this. The top floor is yours. Back then, I thought she was just being sentimental. Now, I realized she'd known. I left Santorini the next morning. Alone. With a suitcase, a broken heart, and a new goal. I wouldn't sue. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't run. I'd rise. And the next time Julian Hawthorne saw me, I wouldn't be the woman he abandoned. I'd be the woman signing his paycheck. Because I wasn't the bet. I was the consequence. And his fall had just begun. The elevator dinged like a bell at a boxing match. I took one last breath before the doors opened to the top floor of Larch and Everhart. The familiar polished marble, the scent of eucalyptus from the lobby diffusers, the soft clatter of expensive heels, all of it welcomed me like a ghost returning to her own funeral. But I wasn't a ghost. I was reborn. A week after Santorini, I walked back into the firm not as Julian's naive bride, but as the woman who had memorized every detail of the firm's inner workings during our whirlwind courtship. My resignation letter. Never sent. Margaret's key. It now unlocked more than an office. It opened a new chapter. I wore a navy blue suit that meant business. No frills. No apologies. My hair was pulled back, sharp and clean. No wedding ring. No trace of the woman who had once blushed when Julian winked across the boardroom. Miss Caldwell, the receptionist stammered, clearly startled. We weren't expecting. I'm here for a meeting with Margaret, I replied smoothly. Seconds later, I was ushered into a conference room with glass walls and the best view of Manhattan. Margaret Everhart stood there in her signature gray pantsuit, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just studied me. Did he tell you everything? She asked, no small talk. I nodded. Enough. And you still came back. I'm not here to beg, I said. I'm here to build. A long pause. Then, slowly, she nodded. Good. Then let's get to work. Margaret hadn't just given me an office. She gave me a strategy. While Julian had been busy gloating over his petty win, Margaret had been grooming someone else to take his place, someone with talent, loyalty, and nothing left to lose. Me. You'll start as Senior Director of Global Accounts, she said, sliding a folder across the table. We'll keep it quiet, for now. I want you in every major meeting. I want them to underestimate you. Let them. I opened the folder. My name, already printed on the company letterhead. A salary that made Julian's look quaint. A team of 5 analysts reporting directly to me. All women. All underestimated. All ready. Your first project is the Almeric acquisition, she added. And Julian's team is getting for it too. Perfect, I said. That afternoon, I moved into my new office, on the same floor as Julian, just down the hall. I passed him in the hallway 3 times. The first, he didn't notice. The second, he did a double take. The third, he stopped cold. Amelia, he said, blinking like he'd seen a ghost. What the hell are you doing here? Working, I replied, breezing past him. You. The look on his face. Worth every tear I'd cried into that ocean breeze in Santorini. By Friday, I'd already rewritten half the Almeric proposal Julian's team had been preparing. My plan was sharper, leaner, and more aggressive. The board didn't even flinch when I presented it. They listened, nodded, and asked for a detailed implementation plan. Julian sat across the table, jaw tight, hands fidgeting. Impressive, he muttered under his breath as we filed out. Thanks, I said. You always said I had potential. He laughed. This is cute, Amelia. But don't think for a second you're going to win. I stepped closer. Julian, I already did. You just haven't read the memo yet. He stared at me, stunned. Not by my words, but by the fact I wasn't broken. That the woman he had discarded like trash was walking taller, speaking louder, and earning respect in rooms he used to dominate. And I wasn't done. That weekend, I stayed late in the office, reviewing contracts and redrafting the entire operational flow for the Almeric integration. I didn't need Julian's approval. I needed his silence. And so far, I was getting it. By Monday morning, word had spread. Did you hear Amelia Caldwell is back? I thought Julian humiliated her. She's heading the acquisition now. I heard Margaret brought her back. The whispers weren't just office gossip. They were power shifting. Julian's allies grew quieter in meetings. His team started emailing me directly. And Margaret? She watched it all with the satisfied calm of someone watching a carefully set trap snap shut. But I wasn't here to impress her. I was here to finish what Julian started. And take everything he thought was his. At the next executive roundtable, I slid a folder across the table to Julian before the meeting even began. Just a courtesy copy of my final draft, I said lightly. I figured you'd like to see what a winning proposal looks like. He opened it. Read the first few pages. Then, for the first time, he looked afraid. See you at the vote, I said, turning away. And I meant it. Because revenge wasn't loud. It was strategic. And I had only just begun the opening move. By the end of that week, my name was on everyone's lips, even if they whispered it behind closed doors. I didn't mind. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. The louder the murmurs became, the more Julian's world began to shrink. And I wasn't even breaking a sweat yet. The board meeting where the Almeric vote would take place was scheduled for the following Thursday. That gave me exactly 6 days to outmaneuver a man who thought charm was a strategy and backroom bets were currency. But I knew Julian better than anyone. I knew his shortcuts. His tells. His reliance on charisma to compensate for lack of preparation. So, I did the one thing he never anticipated. I outworked him. I called Almeric's executive team directly and arranged a confidential meeting. Over black coffee and confidential NDAs, I listened more than I spoke. Their biggest concern. Integration without disruption. Julian's proposal had been flashy but brittle, heavy on promises, light on substance. Mine. Clean, executable, and backed by predictive models they hadn't even seen before. Who wrote this? The Almeric CFO asked, flipping through the appendix I had crafted overnight. I did, I replied, meeting his eyes. He nodded once. Then we're leaning your way. The real knife didn't come from me. It came from the data. Over the next several days, I built a case not just for the acquisition, but for my leadership. I turned my team of 5 into a quiet task force. We worked in silence, strategically, every document scrubbed clean of ego, every model refined with mathematical precision. On Tuesday afternoon, Julian made a desperate move. He invited the board's younger partners for drinks at Mercer Lounge, his usual haunt. I knew, because one of them accidentally CC'd me on a meeting reminder. Classic. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I sent Margaret a 1-page executive summary of my revised strategy, along with a footnote that read, all projections now adjusted with updated Almeric data. Additional gains expected. She responded within 2 minutes, asterisk perfect. Let him drink. You win with numbers, asterisk. Julian didn't realize the tide had shifted until Wednesday morning, when the CEO herself, Evelyn Royce, stopped by my office unannounced. She was a legend, sharp as glass, always in heels, and known to fire underperformers with a single email. I hear you've been busy, she said, arms crossed. Yes, ma'am, I replied, standing. Walk with me. We paced the hallway in silence until she stopped near the conference room and said, You were always underestimated, Amelia. I watched it happen. The wedding, the fallout, the rumors. I never thought you'd come back. I didn't come back for him, I said. I came back for this. She smiled. Good. Because tomorrow, I expect you to take it. That night, Julian tried to corner me in the elevator. You think this makes you powerful, he hissed. You think this will last. I didn't even flinch. I don't think it. I know it. You'll never belong in this world, Amelia. You're a pity hire. A poem for Margaret and Evelyn. No, Julian, I said, as the doors opened to the top floor. I'm the queen. And you're still trying to remember how to play the game. The morning of the vote, I arrived early. Not to rehearse, I'd done that already, but to observe. Julian walked in with his usual smug expression, but there was tension in his shoulders. His confidence was performative now, each smirk slightly delayed, each handshake more forced. At exactly 9 a.m., Evelyn entered and called the meeting to order. Today we'll hear final presentations on the Almeric acquisition, she said. Julian Hawthorne, you first. He launched into his pitch, polished, enthusiastic, and full of buzzwords that meant nothing. It sounded impressive, but even his own team looked bored. Then it was my turn. I stepped to the podium, connected my laptop, and pulled up a clean, minimalist deck with 3 slides. I won't waste your time, I began. This is what Almeric wants, what we can deliver, and what it will cost us if we fail. I walked them through the numbers. No theatrics. No fluff. Just truth. When I finished, there was silence. Then Evelyn looked around the room. All in favor of Amelia Caldwell's proposal. Every hand went up, except Julian's. Motion passed, she said. Effective immediately, Amelia will oversee the Almeric integration as Executive Director of Strategic Acquisitions. Julian's face turned the color of spoiled wine. I sat back down without a word, my heart calm, my hands steady. But inside, I was on fire. Not just for the win. But for what came next. Julian had just watched me claim the one thing he thought was untouchable, his influence. But what he didn't know was that the next step would hit even closer to home. Because the project he'd built his entire reputation on. It was about to become mine. The morning after the board meeting, Julian didn't show up to the executive huddle. His chair sat empty while mine was pushed slightly forward, closer to the screen, closer to the power. No one asked where he was. No one cared. It was the first time in years that the firm had publicly favored someone over him, and everyone could smell the shift. Excellent work on Almeric, Evelyn said as the meeting wrapped. Prepare to onboard their European division by the end of the quarter. Yes, ma'am, I replied, already opening the task list on my tablet. Margaret caught me in the hallway after, her voice low. He's rattled. That was your first clean kill. I'm not here to kill, I said. I'm here to reclaim. She smiled. Same difference. The next few weeks were a flurry of press releases, client calls, and closed-door sessions with Almeric's top brass. I traveled to Zurich with a lean team to begin restructuring and was back in New York before anyone noticed Julian had even tried to reclaim control. Because while he was licking his wounds, I was expanding my territory. And then came the Morrison portfolio. A legacy client. His legacy client. Julian had been managing Morrison Holdings for nearly 5 years. They were his golden goose, one of the biggest accounts in the firm, and the only reason his quarterly numbers still held weight. But after my win with Almeric, the board began asking questions. Is Hawthorne still the right fit for Morrison? Someone asked during a budget review. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Margaret and Evelyn handled it. Let's assign Amelia as co-lead, Margaret said smoothly. See how her approach compares. It was more than a test. It was a warning. Julian knew it. I knew it. He came storming into my office the next morning, slamming the door behind him. This is sabotage. I didn't look up from my screen. It's succession. He stepped closer. You really think they're going to hand over Morrison? After everything I built? No, I said. I think they already have. The silence that followed was delicious. It hung in the air like a verdict. His jaw worked, eyes narrowing. "You're just a phase, Amelia," he spat. "A post-divorce marketing stunt. They'll get tired of you." I stood then. Calm. Unbothered. Maybe. But even if I am just a phase, I'll still do more with this opportunity than you ever did with your position. He left without another word. That Friday, I flew to Chicago to meet with the Morrison team. They greeted me with cautious optimism. I knew they had history with Julian. I didn't care. I spoke their language: growth, stability, expansion, and when I walked them through my projections, I saw the decision form behind their eyes. By Monday, I was sole lead. Julian didn't even try to fight it. Instead, he started avoiding meetings. Skipping strategy sessions. Sending interns to handle his reports. Word spread fast. The golden boy was tarnished. Meanwhile, I was glowing. Evelyn pulled me aside after a board luncheon. "You ever think about where you want to go from here?" I paused. "You mean, long-term?" "I mean CEO track," she said, eyes locked on mine. "You've got it. You just need to keep proving you want it." It was a lot to process. Just a year ago, I was weeping into a hotel pillow while Julian booked a return flight alone. Now, I was being groomed for the top seat in a billion-dollar firm. That night, I called my mom. "Do you remember what I said when you told me you were marrying that man?" she asked gently. "You said, 'I hope he knows what he's getting into,'" I laughed. She chuckled. Turns out he didn't. The next day, I passed Julian in the hallway. He was alone. No entourage. No confidence. Just a man starting to realize he had made a mistake that couldn't be undone. I could have said something cruel. Could have reminded him of Santorini. Of the bet. Of the way he laughed while my heart shattered. But I didn't. I just nodded once, stepped into the elevator, and let the doors close. Because the truth was, I didn't need to humiliate him. He was doing it all by himself. And I was already looking higher. The annual investor gala was in 2 weeks. A black tie event. The firm's social Super Bowl. Everyone would be there. Including the man who had once bet $10,000 that I'd never make it beyond his shadow. I had my dress picked out. My speech prepared. And a very specific plan for what would happen that night. Not just to Julian. But to every man who had ever gambled on the silence of a woman they underestimated. The gala was held at the Hamilton Grand Ballroom, a cathedral of chandeliers, mahogany, and money. Every step echoed ambition. Every face wore the polite veneer of power. I walked in alone but felt surrounded by something much larger, my past, my vindication, my momentum. The moment I stepped onto the marble floor, conversations paused. Heads turned. The woman they thought would crumble had arrived, and not as an accessory to someone else's reputation, but as the storm in heels. I wore a black silk gown with a sharp slit and an open back. It was elegant, deliberate, and utterly unforgettable. On my wrist, a platinum watch, Julian's gift from our wedding day. I kept it. Tonight, it would serve a different purpose. Julian arrived 20 minutes later, walking a step behind a junior associate named Harper, who had all the charm of a spreadsheet and none of the context. His attempt at appearing unfazed was painfully transparent. We locked eyes across the room. He hesitated. I didn't. "Amelia," said Evelyn Royce, sweeping to my side with 2 glasses of champagne. "You're the talk of the evening." "I thought Julian would be," I said coolly. "Oh, he's trying," she smirked. "But your name is on the lips of every investor in this room. Especially after that Morrison turnaround." Let them talk, I said. I'm just getting started. The evening unfolded like a performance I'd been rehearsing my entire life. I moved from conversation to conversation with precision, dropping insights, leaving impressions, sealing deals with a smile. The senior partners watched with interest. Evelyn stayed close, quietly signaling her approval. Then came the toast. Margaret took the stage with her usual confidence, but instead of the rehearsed speech about legacy and shareholder growth, she handed the microphone to Evelyn. I'd like to recognize someone tonight, Evelyn said, her voice slicing through the room's ambient noise. Someone who not only salvaged a multi-million-dollar acquisition but also redefined how this firm sees potential. My heart thudded, but my face stayed composed. Amelia Caldwell, please join me. The applause rose like a wave. Julian clapped too, stiffly, his mouth twitching with something between resentment and regret. I walked to the stage, heels clicking like punctuation marks. Evelyn leaned toward the mic. This woman was once seen as an accessory to someone else's success. Tonight, she's the architect of her own. I took the mic. I won't pretend this journey has been smooth, I began. But every detour, every setback, and every betrayal led me exactly here. And for that, I am grateful. There it was, my public acknowledgement of what everyone knew but never said out loud. The room vibrated with unspoken truths. Julian looked like he wanted to disappear into the carpet. After the toast, I found him alone near the bar, swirling his drink. You're enjoying this, he muttered as I approached. I earned this, I replied. There's a difference. His eyes flicked to the platinum watch on my wrist. Didn't think you kept that. I smiled. I like to remember who funded my first strategic win. His jaw tensed. You think this is the end of me? No, I said, leaning in just slightly. I think it's the beginning of you realizing you were never the story. I was. He said nothing. Just stood there, hollowed out by the reflection of what he used to be. I walked away without another word. But the real twist came later. Toward the end of the night, Evelyn gathered a handful of us in a private lounge, the firm's most senior leaders and a few select clients. It was invitation only. Julian wasn't on the list. Inside, she made her final announcement of the evening. We've been considering a shift in international strategy, she said. We need someone to lead global operations. Someone who understands not just markets, but people. She looked at me. Amelia, the position is yours, if you want it. I didn't pause. I do. That was the moment. Not when Julian left me. Not when I took Almeric. Not even when I flipped Morrison. This was it. I had officially outranked him. Outpaced him. Outgrown him. And he knew it. As I left the gala, flashes from the press cameras caught my smile, but they couldn't capture what I felt. Not revenge. Not triumph. Freedom. From him. From who I used to be. From the idea that I needed anyone to legitimize my place at the table. That night, as I lay in bed in my own apartment, not a honeymoon suite, not a shared condo, I realized something vital. Julian had placed a bet. But I had placed something better. A boundary. And boundaries never collapse. They build empires. 3 days after the gala, I moved into the office Julian once tried to block me from. It had floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the skyline and a door that now bore my new title, Global Director of Strategy. I didn't hang personal photos. I hung maps, markets, expansions, territories to conquer. Julian, meanwhile, was reassigned to a special project team. The kind of vague exile they use when someone is too high-profile to fire but too irrelevant to keep close. His new office. Half the size of mine. No windows. No team. Just echoes of past glory and unanswered emails. Margaret stopped by my new office one morning with a sleek black folder in hand. This is the Lawson Initiative. A European conglomerate is considering acquisition. The partners want you to lead negotiations. I flipped through the folder. It's a ghost account. No movement in 5 years. Exactly, she said. We want to wake it up. And Julian? I asked, already knowing the answer. Was pitching it for 2 years, she said. Didn't get past the first lunch. I nodded. I'll have a proposal ready in 48 hours. She grinned. That's why it's yours. The Lawson Initiative became my obsession. I worked late, reviewed every archived pitch, cross-referenced global trend data, and even flew to Vienna without telling anyone. By Friday, I was back with a signed letter of intent and a handshake from their CFO. I dropped the document on Evelyn's desk Monday morning. She stared at it. Then at me. How the hell did you do this? By not assuming charm could replace competence. She laughed. We're going to need a new structure. Within the month, a second title joined my office door, Vice President of International Affairs. Julian passed my office twice a day. Once in the morning, once after lunch. He never looked in. But I knew he saw. The board did too. They invited me to the quarterly retreat in Singapore, an honor reserved for only the top 5 executives. At the airport, I noticed Julian at the gate. Didn't realize you were attending, I said. He adjusted his duffel bag. Last-minute invite. They must be feeling nostalgic, I replied. You used to be on the list. He didn't respond. On the plane, I sat in business class. He sat in coach. The retreat was a whirlwind, panels, pitches, press. I led 2 major sessions and walked away with 3 joint venture deals in the works. Evelyn whispered over lunch, the board's discussing succession planning. I blinked. Succession for what? CEO, she said. Margaret plans to retire in 2 years. We need a shortlist. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. And I'm on it. She smiled. You are the list. When we returned to New York, I kept my head down and my focus sharp. Julian, however, began to crack. Reports came in late. Clients asked to be reassigned. His few remaining allies distanced themselves. Then came the email. Subject line, HR review request, Julian Hawthorne. It landed in my inbox by mistake. But I didn't forward it. I read every word. Complaints. Misuse of expense accounts. Inappropriate comments during a Zoom call. He was unraveling. Slowly, publicly, and exactly the way I had once feared I would after Santorini. But I didn't gloat. I didn't leak the memo. Instead, I scheduled a meeting. In the small glass conference room off the 17th floor, I waited for him. When he walked in, he looked gaunt. Smaller. Less dangerous. You wanted to meet? He asked. Yes, I said. This isn't about revenge, Julian. This is about reality. His brows knit together. You lost, I said, calmly. Not just the job. Not just the power. But the illusion that you were untouchable. He exhaled, defeated. You came back just to destroy me. No, I said. I came back to rebuild myself. You just happened to be standing in the way. He stared at me for a long time. Then nodded. I'll tender my resignation by Friday, he said. Good decision, I replied. He stood, paused, and said something I never expected. I underestimated you. No, I corrected. You never saw me at all. He left quietly. The firm didn't issue a press release. No farewell cake. No slideshow of achievements. Julian Hawthorne simply ceased to exist in our ecosystem. And I expanded. New hires came under my wing. Female analysts began citing my rise as motivation. Recruiters used my name to entice top talent. The firm's stock jumped 6% after the Singapore announcement, and the press dubbed me the I strategist. I didn't mind the nickname. Because while others played to be liked, I played to lead. And in this game, leadership wasn't handed down, it was claimed. The final piece of my plan was still unfolding. Because Margaret hadn't officially announced her retirement yet. But I was ready. For her seat. For her legacy. And for the final move in the game Julian once thought he controlled. The only thing left was timing. Margaret Everhart was the kind of woman who never gave compliments, only opportunities. When she called me into her office that Friday morning, I didn't bring a notepad. I brought readiness. She poured 2 cups of coffee, a ritual usually reserved for board members. Her office smelled like leather and lemon polish, and her windows faced east, toward the rising sun. I've submitted my retirement notice to the board, she said without ceremony. Effective in 90 days. I didn't blink. Congratulations. They're going to announce the transition next week. Evelyn will move into my seat as chairwoman. And the CEO. She paused, studying me. Will be me? I asked, voice calm. She smiled, the corners of her mouth barely shifting. If you want it. I took a slow breath. Then, I've wanted it since the day Julian left me in Santorini. She handed me a sealed envelope. Inside is the formal offer. Review it. Accept it. And start preparing your succession plan. You're going to need a strong second in command. I already had someone in mind. When I left her office, the sun was breaking through the clouds. A rare moment of light in a skyline full of steel. Back in my office, I sat alone with the envelope for a full hour before I opened it. Not because I doubted, but because I wanted to remember the weight of the moment. 1 year ago, I was just a newlywed, humiliated and discarded on a foreign beach. Now, I was one signature away from becoming CEO of the very empire that once tried to eat me alive. When the news broke the following Monday, the headlines were exactly what I expected. Amelia Caldwell named first female CEO of Larch and Everhart. From humiliation to power, the rise of the ice strategist. Wall Street's most ruthless bet just backfired. Julian sent no public statement. He didn't have to. By then, he'd relocated to a small firm in Connecticut, managing municipal portfolios, far from skyscrapers and television cameras. His LinkedIn profile was scrubbed clean of his time at LNE. As if erasing the memory would rewrite the outcome. But the memory lived. Not as revenge. As foundation. I called a full company town hall that Friday, an internal announcement to address what everyone already knew. I stood at the same podium where Julian once gave his engagement speech. Where I once sat in the shadows while he bragged about my efficiency as if it were an accessory to his ambition. This time, the room fell silent when I walked in. Thank you for being here, I said. A year ago, I returned to this firm in the aftermath of something deeply personal. I didn't come to make noise. I came to build something unshakable. I paused. Let them lean in. Leadership isn't about ego. It's about clarity. And under my leadership, clarity will define everything we do, how we hire, how we innovate, how we grow. The applause started slow. Then rose. When I stepped off the stage, a junior analyst, fresh out of Columbia, stopped me near the elevator. "Your story," she said, "it's why I applied." I smiled. "Then let's make sure it's never just a story. Let's make it a legacy." That night, I sat in my penthouse overlooking the city. Margaret had gifted me her watch. Evelyn had sent champagne. My mother left a voicemail that simply said, "I always knew." But the moment that hit hardest. The knock at my door. I opened it to find Ethan Wu, one of the firm's sharpest dealmakers and my closest peer, holding a single folder. "I heard about the role," he said. "And I heard you're looking for a second." I stepped aside. "Come in." Together, we sat on the couch, going over plans for a global innovation arm, an initiative I had dreamt up during my sleepless nights post-Santorini. "Why'd you really come back?" he asked, finally. I looked out at the glittering skyline. Not for him. Not even for me. Then for what? For every woman in this firm who's been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated, I said. I wanted them to know that the ceiling only looks real until you push through it. He nodded slowly. "You're not just the boss now." "No," I said. "I'm the blueprint." As he left, I glanced at the framed quote above my desk. It had been gifted anonymously, but I had a feeling it came from Evelyn. It read, asterisk, she remembered who she was, and the game changed. Asterisk. I turned off the lights. Because tomorrow, the real game would begin. One I didn't need to win. Because I had already changed the rules. The first day I sat behind the CEO desk, everything felt the same, but nothing was. The leather chair. The hum of traffic 20 stories below. The steady rhythm of productivity pulsing through the walls. All familiar. But now, when I spoke, the whole building listened. I started my first morning with an executive roundtable. Not a ceremonial handshake tour. A strategy session. Every division head in the room, every agenda item laser-focused. No one dared show up unprepared. Not with me at the helm. And especially not with Julian's ghost still echoing through these halls. "I want to change how we define leadership here," I said, after the first agenda item wrapped. "We've rewarded charisma over consistency for too long. That ends today." A few older executives shifted in their chairs. But none challenged me. They knew I wasn't speaking in theory. I was speaking in reference. Julian had become a cautionary tale. And now, I was the curriculum. Over the next 30 days, I implemented what came to be known as the Caldwell Framework. A total overhaul of internal development pipelines. No more boys' clubs, no more silent alliances. I installed blind review panels, restructured compensation equity, and publicly posted promotion criteria. It was clinical, transparent, and devastating to anyone who thrived on hidden ladders. One by one, the old guards either adapted or vanished. I didn't fire them. I let the culture speak for itself. Those who couldn't keep up quietly handed in their resignations. Including Thomas Blake, the partner who had hosted the original $10,000 wedding bet. I accepted his resignation in a 4-minute meeting. "Is this personal?" he asked stiffly. "No," I said, flipping through my notes. "This is progress." Meanwhile, Julian's name hadn't been uttered in a boardroom in months. His LinkedIn showed no recent activity. I heard from a former colleague that he'd taken up consulting in a mid-size firm that sold insurance portfolios. He'd wanted to be legend. Instead, he became a footnote. But I didn't dwell on him. Because something else was brewing. The International Women in Finance Summit. A massive, televised event. And they'd asked me to be the keynote speaker. The honor wasn't lost on me. 1 year ago, I was curled on a beach chair in Santorini, reading divorce papers with shaking hands. Now I was being flown to Geneva to stand on a global stage and speak not about revenge, but about reinvention. I wrote my speech in silence. No ghostwriters. No PR spin. Just me and my truth. When the day arrived, I stepped onto that glass stage in front of 2,000 industry leaders and began with the one sentence no one expected. 1 year ago, I was humiliated by a man who bet on my silence. Gasps. Cameras. Notes being scribbled. But I didn't come here today to talk about him, I continued. I came to talk about the women who've been underestimated, talked over, passed by. The women who carry brilliance on their backs and don't wait for applause to deliver it. The room was still. The worst thing he ever did wasn't betraying me, I said. It was making me think I had to prove myself to people like him. I paused. Looked straight into the crowd. I don't anymore. And neither do you. Thunderous applause. The next morning, media outlets exploded with headlines. CEO shatters silence with global speech. Coldwell to the world, I'm not your bet. From victim to visionary. Back at the firm, the mood shifted yet again. My speech wasn't just a mic drop. It was a manifesto. Applications to our internship program doubled within 72 hours. Emails poured in from young professionals thanking me. I read every one. And then, unexpectedly, one from a familiar address. Julian. Subject, thank you. I opened it, half expecting sarcasm. But all it said was, I watched your speech. You were always more than I let myself believe. I hope someday I become the kind of man who deserves the version of you I destroyed, No excuses. No pleas. Just quiet regret. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry. Because I didn't need to. The story was no longer about him. It was about what I'd built after him. That night, as I stood in my glass-walled office watching the city lights blink like distant applause, I whispered a thank you of my own. Not to Julian. To the woman I became when he left. Because she was the one who built this legacy. And now, she was just getting started. It was a Thursday when I received the call that would bring everything full circle. Mrs. Caldwell, my assistant said through the intercom, still not quite used to the change from Emmett, there's someone downstairs. He says he doesn't have an appointment, but it's Julian Hawthorne. I froze mid-sentence, my email half-written. I can have security. No, I said. Send him up. Not because I wanted to see him. But because I needed to. A minute later, he stepped into my office, wearing the same cut of suit, but not the same man. His posture was smaller. His eyes, more hollow. And for the first time in our entire acquaintance, he didn't smile. Thank you for seeing me, he said. I'm only listening for 10 minutes, I replied, gesturing toward the chair opposite my desk. Use them wisely. He sat. And for the first 2 minutes, said nothing. I've watched you, he finally said. Not in a creepy way. But I've followed your rise. I read every article. I watched that summit speech 3 times. I'm aware, I said. Your IP address logged the views. He half smiled, ashamed. I came here today to say something that should have come years ago, he continued. I'm sorry. Not for the bet. That was disgusting, yes. But I'm sorry for what I stole from you. I made you doubt yourself. I made you think you were a means to my success, not the source of your own. I watched him. The apology was not rehearsed. It was messy, uneven, and very human. But I didn't let it sway me. You didn't steal anything, Julian, I said, voice cool. You tried, but all you did was accelerate the inevitable. He blinked. I was always going to become this, I said, gesturing to the room around me. You just gave me an excuse to skip the waiting line. He swallowed hard. I've been offered a teaching fellowship at Cornell. Ethics in finance. Ironic, I know. I raised an eyebrow. I came here to ask your permission, he added. Not for the job. For the anecdote. They want me to talk about the bet. I paused. Then nodded once. You can talk about the bet. He looked relieved. But if you lie, I said, leaning forward, if you reduce it to a lesson learned without showing the cost, I'll make sure they rescind your invitation before your first lecture. He nodded. Fair. When he left, I didn't feel closure. I felt confirmation. That karma didn't always arrive as lightning, it sometimes came in the form of someone asking for permission to speak your name. That weekend, I was invited to keynote another global conference. This one wasn't about women or finance. It was about rebuilding. Resilience. Transformation. The organizers asked me to close the summit with a story. I don't have one, I told the interviewer backstage. I have a system. When I walked out onto the stage in Copenhagen, I carried no script. Just clarity. I'm not going to talk about the betrayal, I began. Because that's not what changed my life. The crowd waited. What changed my life, I continued, was what I did after. When I stopped waiting to be chosen, and started choosing myself. I shared the structure I'd built at Larch and Everhart. The mentorship funnel I designed. The new scholarship fund I launched under my mother's name for first-generation finance students. The initiative I started for survivors of public humiliation to rebuild their careers. The audience didn't cheer like at the last summit. They stood in silence. Reverence. Because this wasn't just a comeback story anymore. This was a map. After the conference, I returned to New York to find a gift box on my desk. No note. No sender. Inside was a photo. Me, standing on stage in Santorini, delivering that first Morrison pitch after the Julian fallout. Behind me, a quote projected on the screen I'd forgotten even writing. Asterisk, a storm doesn't destroy you. It reveals you. Asterisk. I didn't frame it. I didn't need the reminder anymore. That night, I stayed late in the office. Everyone else had gone. The skyline stretched before me like a promise still unfolding. I walked the hallways alone. Past the new hire cubicles. Past the boardroom. Past the locked archives filled with documents bearing Julian's name. And finally, to a door. The one that led to the rooftop terrace. I'd never opened it before. Margaret used to sit out there alone on hard days. Now it was mine. I stepped into the night air, the wind sharp and honest. Below, the city pulsed like a living organism. Above, the stars refused to blink. And for the first time since this journey began, I felt the quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask for applause. Because it already knows what it built. And what it's still becoming. Exactly 1 year to the day after Julian handed me those divorce papers in Santorini, I woke up to silence. No alarms. No meetings. No flights to catch. Just the light spilling through the curtains of my apartment, and a calm I couldn't quite name. It wasn't peace. It was presence. I got dressed slowly. A black blazer, crisp shirt, no jewelry. Today wasn't about display, it was about grounding. I brewed my coffee like I always did, but I drank it on the balcony instead of my desk. Because today, I needed to remember. Not him. Me. My assistant had cleared the day. No meetings, no press interviews, no check-ins. Just one event. One moment. The official unveiling of the Larch and Everhart Innovation Wing. Funded by the new generation of strategic investments. Staffed with analysts from non-traditional backgrounds. Overseen by a board that finally reflected the diversity of the world it served. I named the wing after my mother. Because while Julian had placed a bet on my fragility, my mother had invested in my fire, quietly, unwaveringly, from the very beginning. As I arrived at the event, the media lined the steps, their flashes softer now. They weren't searching for scandal anymore. They were documenting legacy. Inside, the atrium was filled with people. My team. Former interns now running departments. Young women who had once emailed me stories of their own betrayals. CEOs from other firms who had once laughed behind closed doors and now asked to collaborate. Evelyn was there too. She raised her glass when she saw me. "You've built something rare," she said. "You didn't just change this place. You changed what this place can be." I smiled. "Not finished yet." We walked together to the ribbon. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. With a single cut, the wing opened. Applause filled the space, echoing through marble and glass. Afterward, I slipped away to the private lounge upstairs. The same one where Julian once tried to play chess with people's futures. I lit a single candle and placed it in the corner window. No photo. No plaque. Just a symbol. A quiet acknowledgement of what had been lost. And what had been won. Later that evening, I returned home and found a handwritten letter in my mailbox. No return address. But I knew the handwriting. Julian. I stood there, holding it, for a long time. Then I sat down and opened it. Amelia. Asterisk, I don't expect a response. I just want to say thank you. For proving me wrong. For being the woman I was too small to imagine. I teach now. And every semester, I tell my students about the bet. I don't protect myself in the story. I let them see what arrogance costs. I tell them about you. Not as a revenge fantasy. But as a reminder that brilliance doesn't need validation to be real. It just needs to survive long enough to become undeniable, asterisk. You were always undeniable. Julian. I folded the letter. Slipped it into the back of my bookshelf. Not as a keepsake. As a record. A timestamp. A marker on the map of where I had once been. I walked to the mirror. Looked at myself. And asked the one question I hadn't in 12 months. What do you want next? The answer came softly. To lead. Not just a company. A movement. So I sat down at my desk and outlined a foundation. One that would fund women-led ventures in traditionally male-dominated industries. No bureaucracy. No red tape. Just capital, coaching, and community. By midnight, the proposal was done. By morning, it was funded. And by next year, it would have a name, the Caldwell Collective. As I shut down my laptop, I looked out the window again. The skyline blinked back at me like a constellation I now recognized. A constellation I had mapped with every step, every scar, every silent refusal to fold. I thought about the girl in the silk robe on that balcony in Santorini. How small she must have felt. How powerful she had become. Because she didn't let the moment define her. She let it refine her. And that was the difference between a bet and a blueprint. A bet fades. But a blueprint builds. Forever.